Welcome to this build video for the 1606 Electro-Magnetic switch. It should look like this when we're finished. Pretty cool, and it's quite a fun build, I think. I like to think that all of the modules that I make are fairly easy to put together, but this one is particularly satisfying, I think. So you're going to want some basic tools. You need a soldering iron, and preferably some solder for the soldering iron. You're going to want some side cutters for clipping off the legs of the resistors and things. You're going to want some pliers for fiddly things that your fingers are just not good for. And you're going to want this little screwdriver that came with the kit. Little flathead screwdriver there. So let's talk about the boards. So there's 3 boards with this project. You got the backboard, front, and the panel. And this side of them is the top. And if you flip them over, that's the bottom side of all of them. Just so you don't get confused between terms like back and bottom and top and front. They are different things. Front board, backboard, top of the front board, top of the backboard. You get it. And at certain points, we're going to be soldering things on both sides of these boards. So pay attention to that in the build document, which you can follow along with as we go. So we're going to start with the backboard here. Let's put these to the side for now. Easiest thing to do is to start with the smallest components. That's going to be these diodes here. The thing with diodes is you have to make sure that they go round the right way. Can you see on this one, it's got a stripe on this side. So you want to make sure that the black line matches up with the little stripe on the silk screen, and make sure that you save 3 of these cut off legs here, because we're going to use them later. So now I've soldered those 3 diodes on, I'm going to move on to this resistor here. Plonk. Plonk. Now we're going to solder in this little trimmer. The legs will only let it go in one way, so you can't solder it the wrong way round. And then solder in C1 here. Next we're going to solder in this 2N3904 transistor, and I'll show you how to do that the easy way. You want to bend out this left side leg about yay far, bend out the right side leg about that far. Then you take your pliers, you grab it around about there, and then bend it down so that you got a nice little angle on it. Do the same with the other side. Bend it down. Look at that. And that will fit exactly into its little socket there. Make sure that the shape of it matches the shape on the silk screen, the flat side to the flat side, and solder it on in. Best to start with the middle leg first. It's easy to get your soldering iron in there. Be checking all your solder joints as you're going along. After you've done that transistor, we're going to do the electrolytic capacitor. And you want to make sure that this is the right way round. And you can tell the positive and negative side of the capacitor because it's got a negative stripe on one side and the longer leg on the positive side. And on the symbol here, we've got a negative stripe there and a plus sign on the other side. So the long leg goes to the plus sign, the negative stripe goes to the negative stripe. Push that down onto the board and solder on in. Now we're going to turn the board over to the bottom side and solder in the power header. So push that on in there. And the pads are staggered so it will hold itself in while you solder. There you go. For now, we're done with the backboard, so let's put that to the side. And we're moving on to the front board. Once again, we're starting with the smallest components, which is the resistors. Resistors done, we're going to move on to these female headers here, and they go on the bottom side. You can see the rectangle outline of silkscreen there that tells you which side they go on. And again, the pads are staggered to hold them in while you solder. Just make sure they're pressed down flat to the board before you solder. It should look like that when you're finished soldering those in. So we're going to take these longer 11mm standoffs with the thread on the end and put them through these two holes from the bottom side of the board. Don't worry if it's a bit tight, just thread it on through. Then thread the 10mm female to female standoff on the thread on the top of the board. Make sure it's tight. There you have it. Now we're going to solder in the bulb. You get, try and get it as straight as you can and pushed back to the standoff. You can splay out the legs to hold it in place while you're soldering. It doesn't matter which way round the bulb is soldered in. It's not like an LED. Essentially, it's just a wire. Now we're going to move on to the next section of the build document, mounting the panel. So without soldering them in, you're going to want to insert these Con mini jacks. They go down here, and for the sockets that go in the A and B position, you're going to want to cut off this little outside ground leg. That's to make room for the LED that's going to be above it, and they're grounded through the panel. But do make sure that they're still going in the same way round that they would if they had the leg, so match the ones below. Remember, don't solder them in yet. Now we're going to drop in these red flat top LEDs, and these do have to go in the right way. Again, you've got the long leg is positive, so the positive leg goes to the little positive symbol on the silk screen. Don't solder them in just yet. Now we're going to grab our panel and place that onto the jack sockets. Thread the hex nuts on to the jacks, and you can use one of these little hex sockets if you like. Don't do them too tight, just finger tight, real gentle. There you go. Then you want to take two of these little screws here and screw them through the panel into the standoffs. You can use the screwdriver that comes with the kit. Nice and tight. So now all the panels are lined, we can solder in the jack sockets. Press the board down onto them to make sure they're nice and flat to it. Now you're going to want to maneuver these LEDs through the little holes in the panel. Let's see, there you are, and make sure that they are flat to it. You can put a bit of masking tape across to make sure that they don't stick out, but they just hold themselves in place quite nice. Just solder one leg, check it again, make sure it's good, and then solder the other. Now we're moving on to the section of the build document titled Connecting the Front and Back Boards. So we're going to use these cut-off diode legs from earlier to help extend the terminals on this switch. So what you want to do is take your pliers, grab it around about there, and then bend it over into a little hook. Just like that. Starting with the middle terminal, hook it on over like that and solder it on. I'll just tilt this down slightly at the last second so that the leg is straight, just like that. And then repeat the process for the other two terminals on it. Bend over into a hook, hook it on over, crimp it down to itself, solder it on. You don't want to linger with the soldering iron on the terminal for too long because it'll start to melt the plastic of it. The reason why I do this, and I don't just use normal miniature ones and solder them straight into the front PCB, is because I really like it when the height of the threaded bushing matches the jack sockets. Yeah, it's that, and this is the simplest way to achieve that. Now you're going to tidy that up with a bit of heat shrink. I'm going to cut off about 8mm of heat shrink. So I'm going to just eyeball that. Just slip them on over the solder joints like that. You just want to gently wave the flame over it till it shrinks down, and that'll do it. Don't get too close or linger too long with the flame, otherwise you'll start to melt stuff. Okay, so now we're going to insert this through this front board panel assembly. Can you just see on this side of it, it's got labels for the terminals: common, normally open, normally closed. You want to make sure that these labels are pointing upwards, yeah, so that they will match the terminals on the backboard. You see here, normally closed, normally open, common, normally closed, normally open, common. It's going to go in like that, so you want it all to be positioned this way. And thread a nut on. It doesn't need to be tight. Now, on the top of the backboard, we're going to insert these male headers. Don't solder them in yet. They'll hold themselves in. Now you want to take the relay socket here and just place that in. Don't need to solder it just yet. Now we can connect the backboard with the front and panel, and just make sure that as you're putting it together, those extended legs on the switch here go through their pads. Push the headers together. It slots in nice. The relay socket can't get out now, it's trapped in there. There's the switch legs poking through the back. Now you want to take 2 more screws and thread them into the standoffs through the bottom of the backboard here, and do them up nice and tight. Okay, just push everything together so it's all seated nicely, and you're going to want to then solder in the male headers. Now remember the nut that we thread onto this switch here? Well, you're going to want to adjust that so that the threaded part sticks out at the same height as the jack sockets here. Let's see, about there. Then with the switch pushed down flush to the panel, you want to solder in one of these legs here, just one, then check it, make sure it's reasonably tight. That looks about fine. There, that's about the same height. And then solder in the rest of the legs. If it's not the right height when you check it, just heat up that solder joint and adjust the height of it again. Much harder to do once you've soldered in all 3. Now you can take your nice relay and insert that into the panel. When you're doing this, just make sure that it's round the right way, because obviously the socket itself only has those 3 at the top and 1 at the bottom, and if you're doing it round the wrong way, then you're going to bend the legs, and that's not good. So be gentle with it, make sure it's just seated in there nicely, and then push it firmly for the last little bit. Push it down on in so that the socket is flush to the backboard here, and then put it down onto a surface so you can press down and make sure that it's seated correctly as you solder. So as you're soldering, be pressing down so that the relay socket is soldered flush to the backboard. Now you want to plug it in and test it. Make sure that the red stripe on the power cable goes to the red indicator here. So red stripe down always. And even on these rainbow ribbon cables, the red side points downwards, just like that. And now you can turn on the power, and you should see this A position light come on, and if you press the switch button, it will switch to B. And of course the relay you will hear switching and C. Now we'll just test the jack sockets. So if you take a plus 5 volts signal from an LFO, for example, and plug that into coil, it will cause the relay to switch. So that's working great. And now if you take a cable to a speaker and plug that into the common output or input, it goes both ways, it's bi-directional. Now if you take audio out of an oscillator or something and plug it into either the A or B socket and switch it to it, you'll hear it coming out the speaker. And test the A jack, there we are, it'll go off. And it's all working perfect. If it's not working perfect, the most likely culprit is a bad solder joint. So just have a look at all of the solder joints and give them a little reflow if they look a bit suspicious. There's a good guide on the Adafruit site to show you what good solder joints look like. If after that it's still not working, have a look at the polarized components. So that's the diodes, the electrolytic capacitor, and the transistor. Make sure they're looking good. Also check the momentary switch is soldered in the right way round. Barring that, just make sure that all of the legs on your relay are correctly inserted in there, not one bent over or something. Make sure the relay is the right way round. Make sure that it is a compatible relay, so it has to be a 12 volt DC coil, double pole, double throw relay. You can see on the side here the switch configuration here. Double pole, 2 poles, 1 pole on each side here, and it's a double throw. The common terminal in the middle can switch from one side to the other. You can normally tell if everything's working right when you put in the relay. The LED will come on. There you are. Alright, so that's done. Thank you very much for getting yourself one. I hope you enjoy it. All the clicking and the clacking. See you later.